She was left to die on a tree for being a useless virgin, tied under a winter sky, her wrists bleeding, her breath fading in the snow. The town called it justice. But then, one mountain man rode out of the storm. He thought he was saving a stranger, but the song she whispered in her fever was the same lullaby his dead wife once sang. And when he brought her back from the edge, the whole valley turned against him. Whispers spread. The preacher called it sin. The railroad men wanted her gone. Yet the truth buried in her blood could change the fate of every acre for miles. Now, hunted by law and flame, a broken man and a wounded girl must fight the hatred of an entire town and the ghosts that rule their hearts. What happens when the woman the world left to die becomes the one who can save them all? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The bitter wind howled across the mesa like a wounded animal, whipping snow in stinging sheets that cut visibility to mere yards. Benjamin Brand hunched lower in his saddle, his breath forming crystals in his graying beard. The afternoon light was failing fast, too fast for his liking. He'd meant to check his trap line and be back in his cabin before the storm hit full force, but the weather had turned quicker than expected. His mule picked its way carefully down the snowy slope, hooves crunching through the thin crust of ice. Benjamin kept one mittened hand on the reins, while the other clutched his wool scarf tighter around his neck. The cold found every gap in his clothing, every weak spot in his defense against winter's fury. "Steady now," he murmured to the mule as they navigated around a patch of ice-slicked rock. The wind grabbed his words and scattered them across the mesa. He hadn't always talked to his animals, but 5 years alone in these mountains had changed him. Sometimes days or weeks would pass without him speaking to another soul. The timberline lay ahead, dark pines standing like sentinels against the white world. Benjamin's trapline wound through those trees, following the natural paths of the forest creatures. He'd need to check it quick and head back before full dark. Even with his years of experience, night travel in a storm like this was asking for trouble. Something caught his eye, a dark shape against the pale bark of a cottonwood tree. At first he thought it might be a bear, though it was the wrong season for them to be out. But as he drew closer, the shape resolved itself into something that made his blood run cold despite the bitter weather. A human figure stood bound to the tree trunk. Benjamin urged his mule forward, his heart pounding. As he got closer, he could make out more details through the swirling snow. It was a woman, dressed in what remained of traditional Navajo clothing, now torn and frozen. Her head hung forward, long black hair obscuring her face. Her wrists were bound cruelly tight to the tree with rope, the flesh beneath swollen and discolored. "Dear God in heaven," Benjamin breathed, dismounting so quickly he nearly lost his footing in the deep snow. He pushed through the drifts to reach her, noting with horror the way her skin had taken on a bluish tinge. Then he saw the message carved crude and deep into the tree trunk above her head. Useless. The sight of those hateful letters sparked something in Benjamin's chest, a fury he hadn't felt since the day he'd buried his wife. His hands shook as he pulled off his mittens and pressed fingers to the woman's neck, searching for a pulse. For a terrible moment, he felt nothing but cold skin. Then, there, the faintest flutter beneath his fingertips. "Hold on," he told her, though she showed no sign of hearing. He drew his hunting knife and carefully began sawing through the ropes that held her. The fibers were frozen stiff and tough, but he worked as quickly as he dared, afraid of letting the blade slip and causing more harm. As the last rope gave way, the woman slumped forward. Benjamin caught her before she could fall, shocked at how light she felt in his arms. She was young, he realized, probably no more than 20 summers. Her clothing was too thin for the weather, and her moccasins were worn nearly through. How long had she been out here in the cold? The wind shrieked around them as Benjamin shrugged out of his heavy buffalo coat. His fingers were already growing numb, but he didn't hesitate as he wrapped the coat around her still form. Words he hadn't spoken in years rose unbidden to his lips, fragments of prayers his wife used to say, pleas for mercy and protection. "Lord, help us both," he muttered, as he lifted the woman as gently as he could. His mule shifted nervously as he approached, but stood steady as Benjamin carefully arranged the woman's limp form across the saddle. He secured her with his lead rope, making sure she couldn't slide off, then took the reins and began leading the mule back up the slope toward his cabin. The climb was treacherous. The storm had deepened, turning the world into a white blur. Benjamin relied on instinct and years of experience to find his way, one hand on the mule's bridle, the other extended to feel for obstacles hidden by the snow. Every few steps, he checked to make sure his passenger was still breathing, though he could barely feel anything through his frozen fingers. His mind raced as he walked. Who would do such a thing? He knew relations between the settlers and the Navajo were often tense, but this was beyond the pale. To leave someone to freeze to death, bound and helpless. The fury rose in him again, and he welcomed it. The heat of anger helped ward off the cold. The woman stirred once during their slow ascent, making a soft sound of pain. Benjamin stopped immediately, reaching up to check on her, but she had already slipped back into unconsciousness. Her skin felt like ice beneath his touch. "Not much further now," he told her, though he knew she couldn't hear. "Just hold on a little longer." The words reminded him painfully of another winter night, years ago, when he'd said those same words to his wife, Sarah, as she struggled through a difficult labor. She hadn't held on, despite his prayers and pleading. Neither had their infant son. He'd fled to these mountains afterward, unable to bear the pitying looks from neighbors, the well-meant but hollow words of comfort from the preacher. Benjamin pushed the memories away. This woman needed help now, and dwelling on past sorrows wouldn't save her. He focused instead on putting one foot in front of the other, on finding the safest path through the deepening snow. It seemed to take hours to reach his cabin, though it couldn't have been more than a mile. By the time the dark shape of his home emerged from the swirling white, Benjamin's legs were trembling with exhaustion. But the sight gave him fresh strength. He quickened his pace as much as he dared. The cabin was crude but solid, built to withstand the mountain winters. Benjamin had constructed it himself, choosing a natural hollow in the mountainside that offered some protection from the worst storms. A lean-to shelter stood beside it, where he kept his mule and what supplies wouldn't fit inside. He led the mule straight to the lean-to, knowing he needed to get the woman inside quickly, but also knowing his animal needed attention too. Working as fast as his numb fingers would allow, he removed the saddle and bridle, gave the mule a quick rub-down with a handful of straw, and made sure there was hay within reach. Then he turned his attention to his unconscious passenger. She hadn't stirred again during their journey, and her breathing seemed even fainter than before. Benjamin gathered her carefully in his arms, his buffalo coat still wrapped around her, and carried her to the cabin door. It took some awkward maneuvering to work the latch with his elbow, but he managed to shoulder his way inside. The cabin was cold and dark, but at least it was out of the wind. Benjamin laid the woman gently on his narrow bed, then moved quickly to light his lamp and stoke the banked coals in his small stove. His hands shook as he added kindling and small pieces of split pine, willing the fire to catch quickly. As warmth slowly began to fill the single room, Benjamin turned back to his unexpected guest. In the lamplight, he could see her features more clearly. High cheekbones, a straight nose, lips blue with cold. Frost sparkled in her black hair. Her clothing was traditional Navajo work dress, but torn and dirty as if she'd been roughly handled. The sight of her injured wrists made his jaw clench. The rope had cut deep, leaving raw wounds that would need tending. But first, he had to warm her up. He knew the dangers of freezing, had seen good men lose fingers and toes to the cold. Sometimes, he'd heard, warming a person too quickly could do more harm than good. Benjamin added another log to the stove, then began gathering every blanket he owned. He had 3 wool blankets and 2 quilts his wife had made, carefully preserved through the years. He layered them over the woman, tucking them around her still form. Then he set water to heat for tea and bandages. As he worked, words continued to slip from his lips, bits of scripture, fragments of prayer. He hadn't prayed properly since Sarah died, but something about this situation demanded a response from whatever faith still lingered in his heart. "The Lord is my shepherd," he murmured as he gathered his meager medical supplies. "I shall not want." The familiar words felt strange on his tongue, but they gave him focus as he began the task of saving this woman's life. Outside, the storm raged on, but Benjamin barely noticed. His world had narrowed to this room, this moment, this life hanging by a thread. Whatever tomorrow might bring, whatever consequences might come from his choice to help her, none of that mattered now. For the first time in years, he felt certain he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what needed to be done. He pulled his single chair close to the bed and settled in to keep watch, ready to tend to his patient when she woke. The lamp cast soft shadows on the cabin walls as Benjamin Brand, no longer quite so alone, waited out the long night ahead. Benjamin's hands trembled as he stoked the fire, feeding it precious splits of pine he'd stored beside the hearth. The woman lay still where he'd placed her, wrapped in his buffalo coat, and settled on the braided rug near the warmth. Her breathing came shallow but steady now, each exhale a small cloud in the cabin's chill air. He moved with careful purpose, trying to remember everything he knew about treating someone caught in the cold. The basics were clear enough. Warm them slowly, keep them dry, get something hot inside them if possible. The rest he'd have to figure out as he went along. First, water. He grabbed his largest pot and opened the cabin door, scooping clean snow from just outside. The wind howled past him, driving needles of ice against his face. He shut the door quickly, already feeling the precious warmth leaching away. Setting the pot on his small iron stove, he waited for the snow to melt, then added more until he had enough water for both drinking and tending wounds. While the water heated, he gathered what supplies he could find: clean rags torn from an old shirt, the tin of dried herbs his wife had left behind, a jar of bear grease he used for treating leather. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. He knelt beside the woman and carefully examined her hands and feet. Her fingers were waxy white with patches of angry red. Not good, but not the dead black of severe frostbite either. Her feet, protected by sturdy moccasins, seemed in better shape. Still, he knew the real test would come when she warmed up. "This might hurt some," he murmured, though she couldn't hear him. Gently, he began to rub her hands, trying to restore circulation without damaging the frozen flesh. Her skin felt like ice beneath his calloused palms. As he worked, he studied her face in the firelight. She was young, far younger than he'd first realized. No more than 20 years old, if that. Her features were delicate despite the blue tinge of cold, with high cheekbones and long lashes resting against her cheeks. A strand of black hair had fallen across her face. He resisted the urge to brush it away. The water was hot now. He poured some into his best tin cup and added a spoonful of dried mint. Good for warming the body, Sarah had always said. The thought of his wife sent a familiar pang through his chest, but he pushed it aside. This woman needed help now. His grief could wait. Supporting her head, he managed to get a few drops of the mint tea between her lips. Most of it spilled down her chin, but she swallowed once, reflexively. It was something. Through the long hours of night, Benjamin kept his vigil. He tended the fire, changed the warm cloths on her hands and feet, and tried to get more tea into her. Sometimes she would stir, muttering words he couldn't understand. Navajo, he supposed. Once, clear as a bell, she whispered, "Tali." "Is that your name?" he asked softly, but she had already slipped back into unconsciousness. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters he'd made from scraps of wooden crates. Snow whispered against the walls like ghost fingers. Benjamin found himself talking to fill the silence, the way he sometimes did on long hunting trips. "Storm's got us proper shut in," he told his unconscious guest. "Might be here a few days till it blows itself out. Don't you worry none about that, though. Got plenty of wood split and stored, enough food to last weeks if need be." He paused, realizing he was rambling. "Reckon you can't hear me anyway." Near dawn, as Benjamin dozed in his chair, a sound pulled him from his half-sleep. At first he thought it was the wind playing tricks, but no, it was coming from the woman. She was humming, so soft he could barely hear it, a fragile thread of melody in the darkness. The tune struck him like a physical blow. He knew it. Sarah used to sing it, especially in the early days of their marriage when she would rock in her chair by the fire. A lullaby, she'd said, taught to her by a Navajo girl she'd known as a child. Benjamin sat frozen, his heart pounding. It couldn't be coincidence. This woman, this song. Was God testing him, showing him something? He hadn't thought much about divine purpose since Sarah died, had turned his back on most of his faith. But this... The humming faded as the woman slipped deeper into sleep. Benjamin rose unsteadily and walked to the door. Opening it just a crack, he could see the storm still raging, the world outside nothing but swirling white. They would be trapped here for days, most likely. He closed the door and leaned his forehead against the rough wood. "Lord," he whispered, "if you're trying to tell me something, I surely wish you'd be a mite clearer about it." No answer came except the howling of the wind. Through the next day and night, Benjamin maintained his careful routine. He kept his distance when he could, not wanting to frighten her if she woke suddenly. Her color was better now, the dangerous blue tinge fading from her lips and fingers. The wounds on her wrists needed cleaning and bandaging, but he decided to wait until she was conscious and could understand what he was doing. When the storm finally began to ease on the third day, Benjamin stepped outside to chop more wood. The air was bitter cold but clean, the sky showing patches of pale blue between racing clouds. Snow had drifted halfway up his cabin walls. He worked steadily, the rhythm of the axe familiar and comforting. Each stroke sent up a spray of wood chips that scattered across the snow like seeds. The physical labor helped clear his mind, but couldn't entirely banish his troubled thoughts. What would happen when she woke? Would she be afraid? Would she understand that he meant her no harm? He didn't speak Navajo, and her English might be limited. How would he explain finding her? And what of the people who had left her to die? Would they come looking for her? Between loads of wood, he found himself standing in the doorway, gazing out at the transformed landscape while muttering fragments of prayer. The words came easier now, though they still felt rusty in his mouth. "Show me the way clear," he would whisper. "Show me what's right." Inside, the woman slept on, her breathing stronger now. Sometimes she would hum that haunting lullaby again, and each time it pierced Benjamin's heart anew. He couldn't shake the feeling that something larger than himself was at work here, something that had begun years ago when a settler's daughter and a Navajo girl shared songs beside a different fire. The coincidence was too perfect to be chance. Either God was testing his compassion, seeing if he would help someone in need regardless of who they were, or this was some sort of divine guidance, pushing him toward, what? Redemption? Understanding? He couldn't say. Benjamin stored the fresh-cut wood in the lean-to, making sure to keep some inside near the stove to dry. Every task, no matter how mundane, felt weighted with extra meaning now. Was he chopping wood just to keep warm, or was he preparing for something more? Was he tending this stranger's wounds to save a life, or to heal something in himself? He had no answers, only questions that multiplied like snowflakes in a storm. All he could do was wait, tend to his patient, and pray that when she woke, he would find the right words to bridge the gap between their worlds. The lullaby's melody stayed with him, threading through his thoughts like smoke. He found himself humming it as he worked, remembering Sarah's voice, wondering about the Navajo girl who had taught it to her so long ago. Past and present seemed to be weaving together, creating a pattern he couldn't quite make out yet. As evening approached again, Benjamin settled into his chair by the fire. Outside, the storm was finally dying, the wind's howl softening to a whisper. Soon they would be able to leave the cabin, face whatever consequences waited in the world below. But for now, in this small space warmed by fire and watched over by Providence, all he could do was keep his vigil and wait for understanding to come. By the third day, the worst of the storm had passed. Weak sunlight filtered through Benjamin's cabin windows, casting pale squares on the rough-hewn floor. He had just finished his morning prayers when he heard a change in Tali's breathing. Shorter, more alert. Turning from his spot by the window, he saw her eyes were open, clear and aware for the first time since he'd found her. "Water?" she whispered in English, her voice rough from disuse. Benjamin moved slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Yes, of course." He filled a cup from the bucket he'd kept near the stove. "Can you sit up?" She nodded, though the effort clearly cost her. Benjamin helped prop her against his rolled bedroll, noting how she tried to hide her wincing when the movement pulled at her rope-burned wrists. "Thank you," she said softly, accepting the cup with trembling hands. Her English was accented but clear. "For everything." "No thanks needed," Benjamin replied, settling back on his stool to give her space. Any decent person would have done the same. A shadow passed across her face. "No," she said. "Not everyone would help. Someone like me." The bitterness in her voice made Benjamin's jaw clench. He'd been dreading this conversation, but it needed to happen. "Miss Tali, is it? I heard you say that name while you were fevered." She nodded. "Tali Yazi. I'm Benjamin Brand." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Miss Yazi, I found you tied to a cottonwood, half frozen. There was a message carved above you." "Useless," she said quietly, staring into her cup. "They wanted to make an example." "Who did?" "Men from 3 Cedars, the railroad men." She took a shaky breath. "I only wanted work, honest work, cleaning at the depot. But the boss, he said the only way an Indian woman could work there was to marry him first." Her fingers tightened on the cup. "I refused. He called me proud, useless, said no decent white man would want me now, and my own people had cast me out for being too educated. Benjamin felt sick. He'd heard of such things happening in boom towns, where powerful men thought they could take whoever they wanted. But to leave someone to freeze to death for refusing such an offer. "You did nothing wrong," he said firmly. Tali looked up, surprised by his vehemence. "You believe me?" "I do." He stood and went to the stove, ladling out a bowl of the rabbit broth he'd kept simmering. "Here. You need to get your strength back." She accepted the bowl gratefully, and for a while there was only the sound of her careful sipping and the pop of the fire. Outside, Benjamin could hear the drip of melting snow from the eaves, a warning. The trails would soon be passable again. "They'll come looking," he said finally, "once the snow melts enough for riding. Men like that don't like leaving loose ends." Tali set down her empty bowl, her face composed but her hands betraying a slight tremor. "I know, but I cannot run forever, and I will not pretend to be ashamed when I have done nothing shameful." Benjamin nodded, respecting her courage while worried by it. He busied himself adding wood to the fire, mind working over the problem. The sheriff in Three Cedars, Will Kellen, was generally fair-minded. But would he stand against the railroad men? They practically owned the town these days. The rest of the day passed quietly. Benjamin checked Tali's wrists, cleaning and rebandaging them with strips torn from an old shirt. The rope burns were healing clean, thank God. No sign of infection. She dozed on and off, her body still recovering from its ordeal. As evening approached, Benjamin set up his work area near the fire, laying out tools that needed attention. The familiar routine of sharpening and oiling was soothing, helping him think. He was so absorbed in his task that he almost missed when Tali began to pray. Her voice was low and melodic, the Navajo words flowing like water over stones. Benjamin didn't understand the language, but he recognized the cadence of prayer, the rise and fall, the reverent pauses. It reminded him of his own conversations with God, especially lately. He continued his work, letting her words fill the cabin alongside the scrape of whetstone on steel. There was something peaceful about sharing this space, each of them attending to their own forms of devotion. The loneliness that had been his constant companion these past years seemed to ease, just a little. When Tali finished her prayers, she remained sitting up, watching the fire. "Your home is very neat," she observed. "Most men living alone, they let things fall to ruin." Benjamin shrugged, testing the edge of a knife with his thumb. "Idle hands invite dark thoughts. My wife Sarah taught me that." The words slipped out before he could catch them. He rarely spoke of Sarah to anyone. "She is no longer with you?" Tali asked gently. "No, 3 years now." Benjamin set down the knife, surprised to find he wanted to continue. "Childbed fever. Lost them both, her and the baby. Neighbors said it was God's judgment, that I must have done something to deserve such punishment." His throat tightened. "That's when I came up here. Couldn't bear their righteous faces anymore." "I am sorry," Tali said, "for your loss and for their cruelty. Some people use God's name to justify their own hardness of heart." Benjamin looked up, struck by her words. They were so similar to what Sarah used to say when confronted with others' judgment. Another coincidence? Or something more? The fire crackled between them, throwing warm light on their faces. Outside, water continued to drip from the melting snow, marking time's passage like a slow heartbeat. Benjamin realized that for the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to fill the silence with busy work or movement. There was a kind of peace in this shared quiet, born of mutual understanding and respect. Tali pulled Sarah's old quilt closer around her shoulders. "Thank you," she said again. "Not just for saving my life, for believing me, for treating me like a person, not a thing to be claimed or discarded." Benjamin nodded, unable to speak past the sudden thickness in his throat. He returned to his tool sharpening, but the silence between them now felt different, comfortable, almost companionable. Each had seen something of the other's wounds, recognized something of their own pain in the other's story. As night settled over the cabin, Benjamin found himself reflecting on how quickly life could change. 3 days ago, he had been alone with his grief and his doubts, trudging through existence more than living it. Now he had a purpose again, even if he wasn't quite sure what it was yet. Protect this young woman? Help her find justice? Or simply prove that in a world that could be terribly cruel, mercy still mattered? The answer would have to wait. For now, there was only this moment: the warm firelight, the soft sound of breathing, and the fragile peace they had found in each other's presence. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Tonight, this was enough. He worked late into the evening, tools gleaming in the firelight as he prepared them. For what, he wasn't certain. But something told him they would be needed soon enough. Tali's soft breathing eventually evened out into sleep. But Benjamin remained awake, watchful as the fire burned low and the night pressed close around his little cabin. Outside, the snow continued to melt, each drop marking them one moment closer to whatever would come next. Benjamin found himself whispering another prayer, this one not for guidance but for strength. Whatever happened when the snow melted enough for men to ride, he would not let harm come to the woman who had been placed in his care. Whether by chance or by God's design, he still wasn't sure. But he was beginning to believe it mattered less why she had come into his life than what he chose to do about it now. The morning sun glinted off melting snowdrifts as Benjamin checked his supplies. 2 days of shared meals had depleted his stores faster than usual. He needed salt, flour, and a few other essentials from town. The thought of leaving Tali alone gnawed at him, but they had little choice. "I'll be back by dusk," he promised, securing his rifle to the saddle. "Bar the door while I'm gone. There's wood enough for the stove." Tali nodded from the doorway, wrapped in Sarah's old shawl. "I will be fine. The Creator watches over all his children." Benjamin touched the brim of his hat, struck by her quiet faith. The gesture felt natural, like something from his past life when courtesy and belief came easier. His mule shifted impatiently, breath steaming in the crisp air. "There's jerky in the chest if you get hungry before I return," he added, then clicked his tongue at the mule. The animal's hooves crunched through the crusty snow as they started down the mountain trail. The ride to 3 Cedars took nearly half a day. Benjamin kept a steady pace, mindful of the treacherous footing where snow had begun to melt and refreeze. The winter sun hung pale in a pearl-gray sky, offering little warmth. His thoughts kept drifting back to the cabin, hoping Tali was staying warm enough. By mid-afternoon, the scattered buildings of 3 Cedars came into view. The town had grown since his last visit months ago. New construction crowded the main street, evidence of the railroad's influence. Smoke rose from chimneys, and telegraph wires hummed overhead, strung between fresh-cut poles. Benjamin tied his mule outside Jensen's general store, stamping snow from his boots before entering. The bell above the door announced his arrival with a cheerful jingle that felt out of place. Conversations stuttered to a halt. Eyes turned to watch him, then quickly looked away. Old man Jensen himself stood behind the counter, spectacles perched on his nose. "Benjamin Brand," he said, voice careful. "Been a while?" "Need supplies?" Benjamin replied shortly, setting his empty sacks on the counter. "Flour, salt, coffee if you've got it." Jensen nodded and began measuring out the items. Behind Benjamin, whispers rustled like dead leaves. He caught fragments, saw him in the storm, carrying something on his mule. That Indian girl who disappeared. He kept his back straight, face impassive. Let them talk. The less he said, the better. The store's bell chimed again. Heavy boots crossed the wooden floor, followed by the rustle of skirts. Benjamin glanced sideways to see Reverend Josiah Harp and his wife entering. The preacher's severe black coat matched his expression. "Brother Brand," Reverend Harp's voice cut through the whispers. "We've been concerned about you, living alone up there with your guest." Benjamin counted out coins for his purchases. "No cause for concern, Reverend." "No cause?" Harp's voice sharpened. "When a man takes a savage woman into his home, lives with her in sin?" The store went deadly quiet. Benjamin's hand tightened on the counter edge, but he kept his voice level. "You shouldn't speak of things you don't understand, Reverend." "I understand well enough. First you abandon the church, now you abandon all decency." "Josiah." Mrs. Harp touched her husband's arm, her face troubled. "Perhaps we shouldn't." The door burst open again, bringing a blast of cold air and Clem Rusk. The railroad foreman filled the doorway, his bulk wrapped in an expensive wool coat. Two of his men flanked him. "Well now," Rusk drawled, "if it ain't the mountain hermit himself, heard you found something that belongs to me." Benjamin turned slowly, flour sack in his arms. "Nothing belongs to you, Rusk." "That's where you're wrong." Rusk stepped closer, boot heels clicking on the floorboards. "That Indian girl was going to be my wife, had it all arranged proper-like with her people. Then she got ideas above her station, started making trouble." His lips twisted. "Had to teach her a lesson about respect." "A lesson?" Benjamin's voice was dangerously soft. "You tied her to a tree to freeze." Gasps rippled through the store. Mrs. Harp's hand flew to her mouth. Even Reverend Harp looked taken aback. Rusk waved a dismissive hand. Now, wasn't nothing like that. She ran off in the storm herself, probably addled in the head. I've got men looking for her, worried sick about her safety." His smile showed teeth. "So why don't you tell me where she's at, and we'll call it square." Benjamin set down his supplies with careful precision. "No." "No." Rusk's face darkened. "Listen here, Brand. That girl's my property." "She's not property." Benjamin's words cut like ice. "She's a free woman who said no to you, and you're a coward who tried to murder her for it." Rusk's hand dropped to his gun belt. His men tensed, ready to draw. The other customers pressed back against the shelves, leaving a clear space between the two men. "Careful now," Rusk said softly. "Throwing around accusations like that could get a man hurt, or worse." "Is that a threat, Rusk?" "Just stating facts. Railroads bringing civilization to these parts. Man who stands in the way of progress. Well, accidents happen." Benjamin met his gaze steadily. "I reckon they do, especially to men who think they can own people." The tension stretched tight as piano wire. Mrs. Harp clutched her husband's arm. Old Man Jensen had disappeared behind his counter. Outside, wagon wheels creaked past, oblivious to the confrontation within. Finally, Rusk forced a laugh. "You always were touched in the head, Brand. Living alone up there's made you simple. But don't worry, we'll find her ourselves. Just a matter of time." He adjusted his coat and turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Brand? Better watch your back on the ride home. Trails can be mighty dangerous this time of year." The foreman and his men swaggered out. Gradually, the store's atmosphere began to thaw. People resumed their shopping, though the whispers grew louder. Benjamin gathered his supplies, ignoring Reverend Harp's disapproving stare. As he reached the door, Mrs. Harp stepped forward. "Mr. Brand," she said quietly, Is she really all right?" Benjamin paused, surprised by the genuine concern in her voice. "Yes, ma'am. She's healing." The woman nodded, then glanced at her husband before adding, "The girl they tied up. Did she sing? A lullaby, perhaps?" "Martha," Reverend Harp snapped. "That's enough." But Benjamin had seen something in Mrs. Harp's eyes. Recognition, memory, maybe even hope. He tipped his hat to her and stepped out into the afternoon light. The ride home took longer. Benjamin kept off the main trails, watching for ambush. The sun was setting by the time he reached his cabin, painting the snow in shades of rose and gold. Smoke rose from his chimney. Tali had kept the fire going. When he opened the door, warmth and the smell of cooking welcomed him. Tali stood at the stove, stirring a pot of rabbit stew. She had swept the floor and arranged his books more neatly on their shelf. "You are later than you said," she observed, but her tone held no accusation. "Took the long way back." Benjamin hung up his coat. "Town knows you're here." Tali's hand stilled on the spoon. "And?" "Rusk was there, made threats." He didn't mention the confrontation in the store. No need to worry her more. "Says he'll send men looking?" She nodded, unsurprised. "I heard coyotes earlier. They are growing bolder as winter fades." She spooned stew into 2 bowls. Like men who think they own the world. They ate in silence, listening to the wind and the distant howls of coyotes. The storm that had brought them together had passed, but Benjamin could feel another gathering, not of snow and ice, but of human malice and greed. Tali cleared their bowls with quiet efficiency. "Thank you," she said suddenly, "for standing against them, for believing me." Benjamin looked up, met her steady gaze. "Wasn't nothing any decent man wouldn't do." "But there are not so many decent men left, are there?" She touched the healing marks on her wrists. "The world changes. The railroad comes. Men like Rusk think they can buy and sell everything. Land, lives, souls." "Not everything's for sale," Benjamin said firmly. "Not if we don't let it be." Outside, the coyotes called again, their voices echoing off the snow-covered slopes. Inside, the fire crackled in the stove, holding back the gathering dark. Benjamin and Tali sat in companionable silence, each lost in thought, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers. But for now, they had this moment of peace, 2 souls who had found unexpected sanctuary in each other's presence, sharing warmth against the cold world beyond the cabin's walls. Dawn crept over the mountains, painting the snow-covered valley in shades of pearl and gold. Benjamin stood at his cabin window, a cup of coffee cooling in his hand as he watched the sun climb. The morning air held that peculiar stillness that made every small sound sharp and clear. The crack of a branch under snow's weight, the call of an early bird, the distant... He tensed. Hoofbeats. Setting down his cup, Benjamin pressed closer to the window. Through the crystal-clear morning air, he spotted them. 5 riders, making their way up the narrow trail to his cabin, their horses picking carefully through the melting snow. At their head rode Reverend Josiah Harp, his black coat stark against the white landscape. "Tali," Benjamin called softly, not turning from the window. "Stay inside. We have visitors." He heard her quick intake of breath, then the soft pad of her moccasins across the floor. "Who comes?" "The preacher. 4 others with him." Benjamin recognized Pete Miller and John Hayes among them, ranch hands who sometimes worked for the railroad. The other 2 he knew only by sight from town. "They come for me." It wasn't a question. "They can't have you." Benjamin checked his rifle was loaded, then propped it by the door, visible but not threatening. "Just stay inside. Let me handle this." The riders drew up in front of the cabin, their horses' breath steaming in the cold air. Benjamin stepped out onto his small porch, closing the door firmly behind him. He kept his hands loose at his sides, face neutral. "Morning, Reverend," he called. "Long ride from town." Reverend Harp sat stiffly in his saddle, looking down his nose at Benjamin. "Brother Brand, we've come about the Indian girl." "Have you now?" Benjamin's voice remained mild, though his eyes were hard as flint. "Don't recall sending for anyone. This is a serious matter." Harp's voice carried the same stern tone he used in his sermons. "We have reports you're harboring a kidnapped woman against her will." "That's so." Benjamin shifted his weight, casually positioning himself more squarely in front of the door. "And who says she's kidnapped? Mr. Rusk has made it clear." "Rusk?" Benjamin's laugh held no humor. "The same Rusk whose men tied her to a tree to freeze to death?" Murmurs ran through the mounted men. Pete Miller looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Those are grave accusations," Harp said sharply. "Without proof." "I found her myself," Benjamin cut in. "Bound to a cottonwood with rope. The word useless carved above her head. Want to see the marks on her wrists, Reverend? They're still healing." Nevertheless, Harp pressed on, though his face had reddened. "We must insist on seeing her, to ensure her well-being. No law says I have to let you in my home." "The law says what?" Benjamin's voice hardened. "Show me the paper that gives you right to enter my property. Show me the badge that makes you more than just men on horses making threats." The Reverend's face darkened further. "We represent the moral authority of 3 Cedars." The cabin door creaked open. Benjamin's heart sank as Tali stepped out beside him. She stood straight despite her obvious trembling, her chin lifted. The morning sun caught the healing scratches on her face, the rope burns on her wrists clearly visible where her sleeves fell back. "I will speak," she said in clear, precise English. "Since you have come so far to see me." Surprise flickered across the men's faces. Whether at her appearance or her educated speech, Benjamin couldn't tell. He shifted slightly, ready to move between her and any sudden threat. "My name is Tali Yazzie," she continued. "I was not kidnapped. I was attacked and left to die by Morton Webb, Samuel Cutler, and James Dyer, all men who work for Mr. Rusk. They did this because I refused Mr. Rusk's demand that I become his wife." Her voice gained strength as she spoke. "Mr. Brand found me and saved my life. He has shown me only kindness and respect." Silence fell across the yard. Even the horses seemed to stand still. Benjamin watched the impact of her words ripple through the mounted men. Pete Miller had gone pale. He worked closely with the men she'd named. "You expect us to believe," Harp began. "I expect you to hear truth," Tali interrupted, her accent growing stronger with emotion. "Or does your God only listen to white men's prayers?" The Reverend recoiled, as if slapped. "How dare you?" "I dare because I live," Tali said, "despite what your moral authority tried to do to me." She pulled back her sleeve, fully displaying the rope marks. "These are my proof. Let Mr. Rusk explain them to the law he claims to respect." Benjamin felt a surge of pride mixed with fear. Her courage was magnificent, but he knew it would only enrage certain men further. Reverend Harp gathered his reins tight, his knuckles white. "We'll be back," he said, his voice shaking with suppressed anger. "With the law next time. This isn't over, Brand." "No," Benjamin agreed quietly. "I reckon it isn't." They watched as the riders wheeled their horses around and headed back down the trail, Harp's rigid back a statement of wounded dignity. Only when they disappeared among the trees did Benjamin let out a long breath. He walked to the porch rail and sat heavily, suddenly bone-weary, though the day had barely begun. After a moment, Tali joined him. The morning sun caught her face, highlighting both her scars and her quiet strength. "You shouldn't have come out," he said finally. "Should I hide forever?" She touched her wrist absently. "Let fear rule me like it rules them." "It's not fear that rules them. It's hate. And hate's more dangerous than any wolf in these mountains." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "But wolves at least hunt honestly. They do not hide behind false words about civilization and progress." Benjamin looked at her profile, seeing the steel beneath her gentle appearance. "You know they'll be back. Rusk won't let this go, and Harp's pride won't let him back down." "I know." She met his gaze steadily. "Will you send me away? It would be safer for you." "No." The word came without hesitation. "I won't give you up. Not to wolves, not to men. You have my word on that." Something softened in her face. "Thank you. But why? Why risk so much for a stranger?" Benjamin looked out across the valley, where the morning sun was burning off the last wisps of fog. How could he explain the weight of guilt he'd carried since his wife's death? The years of isolation, of questioning God's purpose? The moment he'd heard that lullaby and felt something long frozen begin to thaw. "Because it's right," he said simply, "and maybe that's all the reason a man needs." They sat in companionable silence as the sun climbed higher, warming the porch despite the lingering chill in the air. Birds called from the surrounding trees, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf answered. The morning was peaceful, but they both knew it was just a pause in the gathering storm. Benjamin studied the trail where the riders had disappeared, mentally calculating how long it would take them to return with whatever authority they could muster. They had maybe 2 days, 3 at most, before things would come to a head. But for now, they had this moment of quiet, this small victory of truth spoken to power, this shared understanding between 2 souls whom fate, or perhaps providence, had brought together. He glanced at Tali, who sat with her face turned to the sun, eyes closed. The morning light seemed to gather around her like a blessing, making her scars less visible while highlighting the quiet dignity of her bearing. Whatever came next, he knew he'd made the right choice that snowy night by the cottonwood tree. Some things were worth fighting for. Some stands had to be taken, regardless of the cost. And sometimes, Benjamin reflected, salvation came not in grand gestures, but in simple acts of human decency, in refusing to turn away when others suffered, in standing firm when justice demanded it. The wolf called again, closer now, and Tali opened her eyes. They shared a look of perfect understanding. The wild things were gathering, both beast and man. But they would face whatever came together, with truth and courage as their shields. Benjamin watched the sun climb over the eastern ridge, his mind churning. The posse's threats echoed in his thoughts. 3 cedars lay between them and the deeper wilderness. They couldn't risk the main trail. They'd have to circle wide through the high country, following game paths he hadn't used in years. He found Tali already awake, folding her borrowed blanket with careful hands. "We need to leave," he said quietly. "Got another cabin, further up, near High Ridge Creek. It ain't much, but it's well hidden." She nodded, accepting this news with the same quiet dignity she showed in all things. "How far?" "Full day's ride if we're lucky. Longer with the mud from snowmelt." He began gathering supplies, dried meat, coffee, flour, the few medical supplies he kept. "Trail's rough. You strong enough?" "I am stronger each day," she said simply, moving to help him pack. They worked steadily through the early morning. Benjamin loaded his mule with care, distributing the weight evenly. He'd done this 100 times before, but never with someone's life depending on it. His own survival had been simple, just him and God in the wilderness. Now, he felt the weight of responsibility pressing down like storm clouds. The sun was barely past morning when they set out. Benjamin led the mule, while Tali rode. He'd insisted on this arrangement, seeing how she still favored her healing injuries. The trail wound up through scrub oak and pine, staying high where the ground was firmer. Spring thaw had turned the lower paths treacherous. Mud sucked at their boots when they had to dismount and lead the mule across particularly steep sections. The animal snorted and balked at difficult spots, but Benjamin's patient coaxing kept them moving. Tali remained silent through most of the journey, but her eyes were alert, taking in landmarks. Benjamin noticed how she tracked the sun's position, marking their direction. Smart woman, he thought. Always good to know your way home, even if home was just a temporary shelter. By midday, they'd climbed high enough to look back across the valley. 3 Cedars was a distant smudge of smoke and buildings, toy-sized in the distance. Benjamin felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. Up here, man's laws grew thin as the air. They stopped briefly to rest the mule and eat some dried venison. Tali sipped water carefully from Benjamin's canteen, her movements precise and measured. Conservation of resources was clearly second nature to her. "Your other cabin," she said finally, breaking their long silence. "Why did you leave it?" Benjamin considered the question while checking the mule's lead rope. "Trapped out that area years back. Beaver mostly gone now. This cabin's smaller, but the hunting's still good." He didn't mention how he'd built it in the first months after Sarah died, when grief drove him deeper into the wilderness than he'd ever gone before. The afternoon brought harder going. Snowmelt had turned several creek crossings into swollen torrents. They lost precious time finding safe places to ford. The mule grew increasingly stubborn, sensing its rider's fatigue. Benjamin found himself speaking to it more frequently, using the same gentle tone he remembered his father using with nervous horses. Shadows were stretching long when they finally caught sight of the cabin. It was little more than a hunter's shelter, 1 room with a small lean-to for firewood. But it was solid, and more importantly, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. Benjamin had built it tucked against a natural rock wall, using local timber that blended with the surrounding forest. "We made it before full dark," he said, helping Tali down from the mule. She swayed slightly, exhausted from the long ride, but remained standing through sheer determination. Inside, the cabin was dusty but dry. Benjamin had left it well secured against weather and animals. While Tali rested, he unloaded the mule and did a quick check of the premises. The root cellar still held some preserved goods, and the roof had held against winter storms. It would do. The next few days fell into a simple rhythm. Benjamin showed Tali how to set snares for rabbits, explaining the signs to look for and the proper way to check them without disturbing surrounding areas. She proved a quick study, her hands soon matching his practiced movements. "Like weaving," she said, demonstrating how she'd modified one of his knots to hold tighter. "The pattern matters." He taught her the safe way to build and maintain a fire, explaining how to keep smoke minimal and control the burn. She already knew more than he expected about finding dry wood, showing him how her people tested for moisture content by smell and weight. Each dawn found Tali outside, greeting the sun with quiet prayers in her native tongue. Benjamin would pause in his morning tasks, listening to the gentle cadence of unfamiliar words. There was something peaceful about it, like the sound of wind through pine needles or water over stones. The cabin needed work. Years of disuse had left gaps in the chinking, and one corner of the roof showed signs of wear. Benjamin set about repairs, grateful for the physical labor that left little room for darker thoughts. Tali helped where she could, learning to mix mud and straw for patching, her clever hands quick to grasp new skills. As her strength returned, so did her color. The rope marks on her wrists faded to thin lines, and the haunted look in her eyes softened. She began humming while she worked, quiet melodies that made Benjamin's heart ache with memories. One evening, as they sat sharing a pot of venison stew, the tune she hummed was unmistakable. The same lullaby he'd heard during her fever, the one Sarah used to sing, his hands stilled on his tin plate. Tali noticed his reaction. "The song troubles you," she said softly. "No." He set the plate aside, struggling to find words. "My wife, Sarah, she used to sing that same song." "Ah." Tali's dark eyes held understanding. "That is why you looked so strange when I sang it before, during the fever." Benjamin nodded, throat tight. "She learned it from a Navajo girl when she was young, used to sing it every night, said it brought good dreams." He stared into the fire. "She died birthing our child. Neither of them made it through that night." The words hung in the fire-lit air between them. Benjamin hadn't spoken of Sarah to anyone in years. The pain had been too raw, too private to share. Tali was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentle as falling snow. "Your sorrow kept her song alive." Something broke loose in Benjamin's chest. Tears filled his eyes, blurring the firelight. He didn't try to hide them. There was no shame in grief before someone who understood its weight. "The old ones say songs are like rivers," Tali continued softly. "They flow through many lands, touching many lives. Your wife carried this one in her heart, and now it flows through you to me. Nothing is lost while the song continues." Benjamin wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Reckon that's true. Enough." He managed a shaky smile. "Sarah would have liked you. She always said God speaks clearest through simple things, songs and sunrises and such." "Your wife was wise." Tali gathered their empty plates. "And you honor her by showing kindness to others, as she would have done." They cleaned up in comfortable silence. Outside, an owl called, and somewhere far off, a coyote answered. Benjamin added wood to the fire, watching sparks rise toward the smoke hole in the roof. For the first time in years, memories of Sarah brought more comfort than pain. The mountain stillness wrapped around them like a blanket. Here, far from the complications of town and territory, they had found an unexpected peace. Benjamin realized he felt more at home in this tiny cabin than he had anywhere since Sarah's death. He watched Tali arrange her bedroll in her chosen corner. She had hung a small pouch of sacred herbs there, and the space somehow seemed both foreign and familiar, like the way her presence had become a natural part of his days. "Thank you," he said suddenly. She looked up, questioning. "For listening, for understanding about Sarah." He cleared his throat. "Reckon sometimes a person needs to speak their grief to lay it down proper." Tali nodded, a slight smile touching her lips. "And sometimes they need someone to hear the song in their sorrow." Benjamin considered this as he banked the fire for the night. Perhaps that's what they'd both found here. Not just refuge from danger, but a safe place to heal old wounds. To remember that even in the deepest wilderness, God provided companions for the journey. The fire settled into coals, painting the cabin walls with soft light. Soon Tali's breathing deepened into sleep, while Benjamin kept his customary watch. Outside, the night wind sang through the pines, an ancient lullaby all its own. The March sun worked its slow magic on the mountain slopes. Day by day, patches of bare ground emerged from beneath the snow's white blanket. Water dripped steadily from pine boughs and trickled down rock faces, feeding the swelling streams below. Spring was creeping into the high country, bringing with it both promise and peril. Benjamin watched the changing season from his morning perch on the cabin's rough-hewn porch. His breath still clouded in the dawn air, but the bite of winter had softened. He could smell the earth awakening, that rich scent of thawing soil and new growth that spoke of nature's endless cycle. Inside the cabin, Tali moved quietly through her morning routine. The soft sounds of her preparing breakfast mingled with the whispered prayers she offered each dawn. Benjamin had grown accustomed to this gentle start to their days, finding unexpected peace in its simplicity. Their lives had fallen into an easy rhythm over the weeks. Each morning, after sharing a simple meal, they would part ways to attend to their tasks. Benjamin worked his trapline, moving it regularly to prevent overhunting any one area. Tali gathered early spring herbs and edible plants, her knowledge of the land's bounty surprising him daily. "The mountains speak if you listen," she had told him one evening, showing him tender shoots of wild onion she'd found pushing through the melting snow. "They tell you where to look when things are ready." She proved it true, returning each day with something useful: bitter early greens to ward off winter sickness, bark for tea, roots that could be dried for medicine. Her quiet competence reminded Benjamin that her people had lived in harmony with these lands for generations before white settlers arrived. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sharing the day's findings and simple conversation. Benjamin had discovered Tali to be thoughtful and quick-minded, her English improving daily as she grew more comfortable speaking it. She showed particular interest in his old Bible, worn smooth from years of handling. "Will you teach me?" she had asked one night, fingers tracing the gold-stamped letters on its cover. So began their evening lessons. Benjamin would guide her through the familiar passages, watching as she carefully sounded out words by firelight. Her questions often startled him with their insight. "This Jesus," she said one evening, "he speaks of mercy, yet your people use his name to take our lands?" Benjamin had no easy answer. "Men twist truth to serve their wants," he replied finally, "but that don't make the truth itself less true." She nodded, considering this. "My father said similar things. He met a missionary before the wars, a good man who spoke of love, not conquest. Father said truth is like water. It finds its own path, even when men build walls to stop it." "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was." Tali's voice held old grief. "He tried to make peace, sign treaties, but some men do not want peace." Benjamin thought of Clem Rusk and his iron determination to claim the canyon for the railroad. "No," he agreed quietly. "Some men only want power." The days lengthened, bringing more light and warmth. Benjamin reinforced the cabin's defenses, knowing the improving weather would make travel easier for anyone searching for them. He showed Tali the hidden cave where she could shelter if trouble came, stocking it with supplies and making sure she knew all the escape routes. They were checking the snares one crisp morning when a hawk's piercing cry split the air. Benjamin froze, recognizing the warning. Something, or someone, was disturbing the natural rhythm of the forest. "Go," he whispered to Tali. "The cave. Quick and quiet." She melted into the underbrush without a sound, leaving Benjamin to face whatever approached. He moved to higher ground, rifle ready but not raised. Soon he heard the steady clip-clop of a horse picking its way up the narrow trail. Deputy Will Kellen appeared around the bend. riding alone. His badge caught the morning sun as he raised his hand in greeting. Benjamin stayed where he was, noting that while Kellen's gun remained holstered, his hand rested near it. "Morning, Brand," Kellen called, reining his horse to a stop. "Sheriff sent me to talk." "Talk about what?" "You know what?" Kellen's weathered face showed discomfort. "The Navajo woman, Tali Yazi. Town's in an uproar over her disappearance." "Disappearance?" Benjamin's voice held dangerous quiet. "That what they're calling it now?" "Look, I'm just the messenger. Sheriff wants her brought in, proper-like. Says there's questions need answering." "Questions were answered when those men tied her to a tree to die." Benjamin's grip tightened on his rifle. "She's under my protection now." Kellen shifted in his saddle. "That ain't how the law works, Brand. Can't just claim guardianship of a grown woman." "And does the law say anything about attempted murder? About leaving someone to freeze?" "Those are serious accusations." Kellen's eyes narrowed. "Got any proof? Besides the rope burns on her wrists, besides her testimony?" Benjamin spat to one side. "Reckon the truth's plain enough for those willing to see it." The deputy was silent for a long moment, studying Benjamin's face. "You really believe in this, don't you? Enough to risk everything?" "Some things are worth the risk." Kellen sighed, removing his hat to wipe his brow. "Well, I've delivered the message. Sheriff wants her surrendered peaceful-like, or there'll be papers drawn up. Rusk's already working on them." "Papers don't make wrong into right." "No," Kellen agreed quietly, "but they give men excuse enough to do wrong in the name of law." He settled his hat back on his head. "That's all I came to say. You take care now, Brand." He turned his horse, then paused. "One more thing. Rusk's been asking questions about old land claims, treaties and such. Might be worth knowing." With that cryptic warning, he rode away. Benjamin watched until he disappeared around the bend, then waited several more minutes before giving the all-clear whistle they'd arranged. Tali emerged from hiding, moving as silently as a shadow. "What did he want?" "To warn us, I think." Benjamin explained about the sheriff's demand and Rusk's papers. "We'll need to be extra careful now. They'll try to use the law against us." Tali's face hardened. "The law. Always the law when it serves them. But where was law when they tied me to that tree?" Benjamin had no answer. Instead, he led the way back to the cabin, mind working through their options. The door would need reinforcing. They should cache more supplies in the cave. Perhaps set up some early warning systems along the likely approach routes. Inside, he began moving furniture while Tali gathered their important possessions into easily carried bundles. They worked in focused silence, each understanding the gravity of their situation. As Benjamin fitted a heavy beam across the door, he found himself whispering the prayers he'd neglected for so long. Not for himself, for wisdom to protect this brave young woman who had awakened his dormant conscience. For strength to stand against injustice, whatever the cost. Tali touched his arm, interrupting his thoughts. "You risk much for me." "Doing right ain't about counting the cost." She smiled slightly. "Another lesson from your Bible?" "Something like that." He finished securing the beam. "Though I reckon your father would have understood it too." "Yes." She moved to the window, gazing out at the lengthening shadows. "He always said true courage is not in fighting, but in standing firm for what is right." Benjamin joined her at the window. The valley below lay peaceful in the afternoon light, betraying no sign of the storm gathering against them, but they both knew trouble was coming. They could only pray they would have the strength to weather it. As dusk approached, Benjamin checked their defenses one final time. The door was as solid as he could make it. Extra ammunition lay ready. Their escape routes were clear. He had done all he could to prepare, yet his heart remained uneasy. Tali lit the lamp, its warm glow pushing back the gathering darkness. She opened the Bible to where they had left off the night before, her finger finding her place with growing confidence. Her quiet voice filled the cabin as she practiced the words, speaking of ancient struggles for justice and mercy. Benjamin listened, cleaning his rifle by habit more than need. The familiar verses took on new meaning now, here in this cabin fortress where they made their stand against modern pharaohs. He found himself wondering what Sarah would think of all this, and smiled, knowing she would have been the first to offer Tali shelter. Night settled over the mountain, bringing with it a chorus of spring peepers from the nearby creek. Benjamin banked the fire while Tali prepared their sleeping places. Neither spoke of their fears for tomorrow, but their prayers that night held extra fervor. The lamp guttered and went out, leaving only starlight filtering through the window. Benjamin took first watch, as always, rifle across his knees. In the darkness, he could hear Tali's breathing grow steady with sleep, trusting in his protection. He touched the cross Sarah had given him, worn smooth by years of worry. "Lord," he whispered, "give us strength for what's coming, and wisdom to know your path when it gets rough." Outside, an owl called, 3 times, like judgment. Benjamin settled deeper into his chair, eyes on the window, and waited for dawn. Thunder rolled across the mountains as Benjamin stoked the cabin's fire. Rain drummed steadily on the cedar shake roof, turning the world beyond their windows into a gray curtain. The warmth of early spring had brought the storm, melting the last patches of snow and swelling the creek with muddy water. Tali sat cross-legged near the hearth, mending a tear in her dress. Her nimble fingers worked the needle with practiced grace, but Benjamin noticed how her shoulders tensed at each crack of thunder. The storm had trapped them inside since midday, the hours stretching long with shared silence and unspoken worries. "Might be a blessing, this rain," Benjamin said, settling into his chair. "Makes tracking near impossible. Even Rusk's men won't venture out in this weather." Tali nodded, then set aside her sewing. Her face held that look he'd come to recognize, the one that meant she carried a heavy thought. "There is something I must tell you," she said softly. "Something I have carried alone too long." Benjamin leaned forward, watching as she reached for the hidden seam in her dress. Her fingers worked at the stitches until they gave way, revealing a folded scrap of parchment tucked within. The paper was yellow with age, its edges soft and worn, but the ink still showed clear and dark against its surface. "This belonged to my father," she said, handling it with reverence. "He was headman of our people before the soldiers came, before the long walk." Benjamin's breath caught as she carefully unfolded the document. Even in the dim light, he could make out the formal script, the official seals, the signatures in both English and Navajo. "A treaty," he whispered. Tali's eyes held both pride and pain. "My father signed this with the Indian agent 15 years ago. It gives our people grazing rights in Red Mesa Canyon, the same canyon where Rusk wants to build his railroad." The pieces fell into place in Benjamin's mind like a trap springing shut. "That's why they wanted you gone. Not because you refused Rusk's offer, but because I am my father's daughter," she finished. "The last one who knows where the boundary stones are laid, who remembers the promises made." Her fingers traced the signatures. "When they could not buy my silence with false marriage, they tried to silence me with death." Benjamin stood and paced the small cabin, mind racing. "This changes everything. If we can get this paper to Sheriff Kellen—" "The paper alone is not enough," Tali interrupted. "There must be someone who can speak to its truth, who knows the sacred places marked in the agreement." She met his eyes steadily. "That is why I could not die on that tree," Why the Creator led you to find me." The rain intensified, beating against the walls like drums. Benjamin thought of Kellen's cryptic warning about Rusk asking questions about old land claims. The whole terrible plot lay bare now. The railroad man's greed, the attempted murder, the threats to drive them from the mountain. "We'll need a copy," he said finally, "in case anything happens to the original." He went to his trunk and pulled out his own precious paper and ink, kept for marking maps and recording his yearly trades. "I'll make it exact as I can." Through the long evening, Benjamin worked by lamplight, carefully copying every word and mark while Tali watched. His hand, more used to setting traps than wielding a pen, moved with painstaking care. The rain continued its endless song on the roof. When he finished, Tali helped him compare the copy to the original. "Good," she said, nodding. "Now we each carry the truth." Benjamin sealed his copy in oilcloth to protect it from the damp. "First clear day. We'll need to reach town. Find Kellen when Rusk's men aren't watching. And if they are watching, then we'll find another way." He stored the oilcloth packet in his coat. "Truth has a way of coming to light," my wife used to say. Tali carefully refolded her father's treaty and began re-sewing it into her dress. Your wife was wise. That she was. Benjamin reached for his Bible, worn smooth by years of handling. Speaking of wisdom, shall we read? It had become their evening ritual, him reading from the Psalms while Tali listened. Sometimes she would share prayers in her own tongue afterward, the ancient words of both traditions mingling in the quiet cabin like smoke from the same fire. He opened to where they had left off the night before, his finger finding Psalm 27 in the dim light. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" The familiar words took on new meaning now, with the treaty's revelation fresh between them. As he read about refuge and deliverance, about waiting on the Lord with courage, he saw Tali nodding slowly, recognizing truths that crossed the boundaries of language and culture. When he finished, she spoke her own prayer, the Navajo words flowing like water. Though he couldn't understand them, he caught the reverence in her tone, the gratitude and supplication that needed no translation. Over the next days, the rain continued intermittently, keeping them close to the cabin. Benjamin spent hours copying the treaty again and again, determined to preserve every detail. Each copy he sealed carefully against the damp, hiding them in different places, under floorboards, in hollow trees, anywhere they might survive if trouble came. The mountain air grew steadily warmer. Tiny green buds appeared on the aspen trees, and the first wildflowers pushed through the wet earth. During breaks in the rain, they gathered fresh herbs and checked the snares, always alert for approaching riders. In the evenings, they continued their shared readings. Benjamin found himself drawing strength from the ancient words, seeing how they spoke to their present troubles. "God is our refuge and strength," he read one night, "a very present help in trouble." Tali listened intently, then shared a story about how her people had survived their own exodus, carrying their prayers through desert and darkness. "The holy people walk with us still," she said, "as your God walks with you." Benjamin nodded, understanding now that they were being led by something greater than chance. His rescue of Tali, the discovery of the treaty, even their growing trust in each other, all of it felt guided by a purpose beyond their own plans. "Providence," he said softly. "What does this word mean?" "It means—" He considered carefully. "It means God's hand moving in our lives, guiding us even when we can't see the path ahead." Tali smiled. "Like finding a water spring in the desert, or a kind man with a sharp knife when you are tied to a tree." The memory of finding her there still burned in his chest, but now it carried a deeper meaning. They had each been lost in their own way, him to grief, her to injustice. Yet somehow they'd been brought together, given a chance to right an old wrong and heal old wounds. As April advanced, they developed a rhythm to their days. Mornings began with Tali's prayers at sunrise, followed by Benjamin's reading from the Psalms. They worked together to maintain the cabin and watch for danger, sharing stories of their different lives that somehow carried the same truths. Benjamin found himself speaking more about Sarah than he had in years, how she'd loved spring wildflowers, how she'd learned that Navajo lullaby from a girl at the trading post. Tali spoke of her father's wisdom, his dreams of peace between the peoples, his careful marking of the boundary stones that would prove their claim. They were no longer just fugitives hiding from Rusk's men. They had become keepers of a truth that needed to be told, carriers of a justice that demanded to be served. The treaty wasn't just a legal document. It was a promise made between peoples, a bridge across the divisions that had brought so much suffering to the territory. One evening, as sunset painted the clouds gold beyond their window, Tali finished her prayers and turned to Benjamin with determined eyes. "When we bring this truth to light," she said, "it must be for all people, not just mine. The land can provide for many if we remember to respect its ways." Benjamin thought of how the railroad men saw only profit in the canyon's red walls, while Tali's people saw a home to be shared with respect. "Your father understood that," he said. "That's why he made the treaty." "Yes." She touched the hidden seam where the document lay safe. "And now we must honor his wisdom by seeing it fulfilled." The rain returned that night, but its rhythm felt different now, less like hiding, more like cleansing. As Benjamin took his turn at watch, rifle across his knees, he felt a peace he hadn't known since Sarah's death. Whatever dangers lay ahead, they faced them in service of something larger than themselves. Tali slept near the hearth, her breathing steady and trusting. The treaty lay safe within her dress, its truth waiting to be revealed. Outside, spring continued its quiet work of renewal, preparing the way for justice to bloom. The weather finally broke on a Tuesday morning, sunlight piercing through the dissipating clouds. Benjamin stood at the cabin door, studying the brightening sky. "Time to move," he said quietly. Tali nodded, already gathering their essential supplies. They had planned this journey carefully over the past days, mapping out lesser-known trails that would keep them away from the main roads where Rusk's men might be watching. Benjamin saddled his mule while Tali secured their provisions. The treaty papers remained safely sewn in her dress, with Benjamin carrying his copy wrapped in oilcloth inside his coat. They set out as the sun climbed past the mountain peaks, following a winding deer trail down through the aspens. The day warmed steadily. Spring had fully awakened the land, painting the slopes with fresh green. Wildflowers dotted the meadows they passed, and new leaves rustled overhead. But neither rider could fully appreciate the beauty, their senses alert for any sign of pursuit. Benjamin led them on a circuitous route, crossing streams to mask their trail and keeping to the shelter of the tree line when possible. His years of trapping had taught him every hidden path in these mountains. They spoke little, communicating mostly through gestures and quiet signals. By late afternoon, their careful pace had brought them only halfway to Three Cedars. Benjamin guided them to a sheltered creek bottom he knew well, screened by willows and cottonwoods. "We'll rest here tonight," he said, dismounting. "Too risky traveling these trails in the dark." Tali slipped down from the mule, stretching her legs. "Good water here," she observed, kneeling to test the creek's flow with her fingers. They made camp efficiently, gathering dry wood and setting snares before darkness fell. Benjamin built a small fire, keeping it low to minimize smoke. The creek's steady murmur would help mask any sound they made. As they shared a simple meal of jerky and corn cakes, Tali noticed Benjamin's gaze growing distant, troubled. "You know this place," she said softly. It wasn't a question. He nodded slowly. "Used to trap beaver along this creek. Before..." He paused, poking at the fire with a stick. "Before Sarah died." Tali waited patiently, sensing his need to speak. The firelight played across his frost-scarred face, softening the hard edges. "Town wasn't kind after we lost her," he continued, his voice rough. "Whispered it was God's judgment on me for marrying young, for not having a proper house built first. Said I should have ridden for the doctor sooner." His hands clenched. "As if I hadn't tried. As if I hadn't nearly killed my horse trying to get help through that blizzard." "They spoke without wisdom," Tali said quietly. "Without knowing your heart." "Reverend Harp was the worst. Told his congregation my pride had killed her." Benjamin's laugh was bitter. "Soon enough, mothers were pulling their children away when I passed. Men wouldn't trade with me. Even the sheriff suggested I might be happier somewhere else." "So you came to the mountain." "Seemed cleaner somehow. Animals don't judge. Mountain don't care if you're grieving." He looked at her across the fire. "Until I found you in the snow, I thought I'd never go back." Tali touched the hidden seam in her dress where the treaty lay. "Sometimes the path back opens when we least expect it." They sat in companionable silence as night settled around them. The fire burned low, and overhead, stars emerged one by one. Benjamin took first watch while Tali slept, his rifle across his knees. Her steady breathing reminded him of Sarah, of nights spent in this same spot during happier times. Dawn came misty and cool. They broke camp quickly, erasing all signs of their presence. The day warmed as they rode, and by mid-morning they could see 3 cedars in the distance, its church steeple rising above the cottonwoods. Benjamin led them on a roundabout approach, using draws and hollows to stay hidden from any watching eyes. As they drew closer to town, his tension was visible in the set of his shoulders. This place held too many painful memories. Near noon, they reached the outskirts where scattered homesteads gave way to the more densely packed buildings of 3 Cedars proper. Benjamin guided them toward a modest house set apart from its neighbors, its small garden neat and well-tended. "Sister Maybelle's place," he explained quietly. "If anyone in this town might help us, it's her." They dismounted in the shelter of a large oak tree. Benjamin approached the house first, signaling Tali to wait. He had barely reached the front step when the door opened, revealing a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and kind eyes. "Benjamin Brand," she said softly, showing no surprise. "I thought you might come." "Sister Maybelle." He removed his hat. "We need your help." Her gaze moved past him to where Tali waited. "The young woman they're all talking about?" When Benjamin nodded, she stepped back from her door. "Best come inside, both of you." The interior of Sister Maybelle's home was simple but welcoming, filled with books and the scent of fresh bread. She settled them at her kitchen table, pouring tea while they explained their situation. When Tali carefully extracted the treaty fragment, Sister Maybelle's eyes widened in recognition. "I remember when this was signed," she said, studying the faded document. "I was new to the territory then, helping at the mission school. Your father was there," she added, looking at Tali. "A dignified man. He spoke of peace between peoples." "You knew him?" Tali leaned forward eagerly. "He would visit the mission sometimes, trading news and discussing scripture." Sister Maybelle smiled at the memory. "He believed the land was big enough for all if we could learn to share it properly." "That's why he made this treaty," Tali said, to protect both his people's rights and the peace. Sister Maybelle's face grew serious. Rusk and his railroad men won't want this known. They've been telling everyone the canyon was never claimed. She set the treaty down carefully. We need to get this to Sheriff Kellen, but carefully. He's an honest man, but he's under pressure from the railroad company. Can you help us reach him? Benjamin asked. Give me an hour to arrange it safely. She rose, practical and determined. Wait here. I'll make sure you can see him without Rusk's men knowing. True to her word, Sister Maybelle returned within the hour. The sheriff will meet us at the old mission house, she said. It's private, and he comes there often enough that it won't raise suspicion. They followed her through back alleys and quiet streets, Benjamin and Tolly keeping their heads down. The old mission house stood at the edge of town, its windows dark but well-maintained. Sheriff Kellen was waiting inside, his weathered face grave. Show me, he said without preamble. Tolly presented the treaty fragment, explaining its history and significance. The sheriff read it carefully, his frown deepening. Benjamin added his own testimony about finding Tolly bound to the tree, about Rusk's men's threats. This is genuine, Kellen said finally. I recognize some of these signatures. He looked up at them, his expression troubled. But acting on it won't be simple. Rusk has powerful friends in the territorial government. The law is the law, Benjamin said firmly. Yes, it is. Kellen carefully refolded the document. I'll investigate this properly, get word to the territorial judge, but it will take time to do it right. He fixed them with a stern look. You two need to stay hidden until I can guarantee your safety. Rusk's men are still watching the trails. They can't go back to Benjamin's cabin, Sister Maybelle interjected. That's the first place they'll look. I have a place, Benjamin said. Higher up, harder to find. Good. Kellen nodded. Stay there. I'll send word through Sister Maybelle when it's safe to return. He hesitated, then added, I'm sorry about what happened before, Benjamin. After Sarah, town wasn't right to treat you that way. Benjamin's jaw tightened, but he nodded once in acknowledgement. As they prepared to leave, Sister Maybelle pressed a package of food into their hands. If you need shelter, she said quietly, my door is open. God's love doesn't stop at the edge of town. They slipped out of three-seaters as carefully as they had entered, taking a different route back into the hills. Behind them, the town continued its daily business, unaware of the changes that had been set in motion. The treaty's truth had been spoken aloud at last, and even if justice moved slowly, it was moving. The sun was starting its westward descent as they rode away from Three Cedars. Benjamin and Tolly traveled in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the day's events. Sister Maybelle's kindness and the sheriff's gruff promise of justice had given them hope, even as they knew the hardest part of their journey still lay ahead. The morning after their return to High Ridge, Benjamin stood by the creek, marking measurements in the soft earth with his boot heel. The spot he had chosen caught both morning and evening light, nestled between two ancient pines that would shelter the small structure he planned to build. The bubbling creek provided a peaceful backdrop, like nature's own hymn. "What are you planning?" Tolly asked, approaching with a steaming cup of coffee for him. Benjamin accepted the cup gratefully. Sister Maybelle's kindness got me thinking. About faith, about making a place for it. He gestured to the cleared space. Thought we might build a prayer cabin here. Nothing fancy, mind you. Just somewhere quiet to sit with God. Tolly's eyes lit up. Like the mission house? Smaller, but yes, something like that. He took a sip of coffee. Might do us both good to have such a place. Over the next few days, Benjamin threw himself into the work. He chose straight pine logs, stripped them of bark, and notched them carefully. Tali helped where she could, holding the other end of the crosscut saw, carrying smaller logs, and bringing water when the sun grew hot. They worked in comfortable silence, broken only by occasional instructions or quiet observations about the day. The cabin took shape, slowly but surely. Benjamin built it small but sturdy, with a pitched roof to shed rain and snow. He left a window opening on the east wall to catch the sunrise, and fitted a simple door from split planks. The floor he made of packed earth, smooth and level. While Benjamin worked on the structure, Tali gathered materials to make it beautiful. She collected eagle feathers that had fallen in the high meadow, carefully preserving each one. From her few possessions, she took out bright wool yarn and began weaving small decorative pieces on a makeshift loom Benjamin helped her construct. As they worked, spring settled more firmly on the mountain. The days grew longer and warmer, and the creek ran full with snowmelt from the higher peaks. Wild roses budded along the path to their cabin, and the first shoots of grass pushed through the remaining patches of snow. "We should plant a garden," Tali suggested one evening as they sat by the fire. "The soil is rich here by the creek." Benjamin nodded thoughtfully. "My wife always said you should plant corn when the oak leaves are the size of a squirrel's ear." He glanced out the window at the budding trees. That time's coming soon. The next morning, they chose a sunny patch near the prayer cabin and began preparing the soil. Benjamin turned the earth with a spade, while Tali followed behind, breaking up clods with her hands. The work was hard but satisfying, connecting them to the land and to each other through shared purpose. "My mother taught me to plant in the old way," Tali said, making shallow furrows with a stick. "Always put 4 kernels in each hole, one for the earth, one for the birds, one for the people, and one for the Creator." Benjamin smiled at the wisdom in this. Sarah would have liked that teaching. He handed Tali a handful of dried corn kernels he had traded for in town. "Show me how." Together they planted 3 short rows of corn, then added 2 rows of beans nearby. Tali explained how the beans would climb the corn stalks as they grew, while their roots would feed the soil. Benjamin marveled at how much knowledge she carried, passed down through generations of her people. As April turned to May, the prayer cabin was finished. It stood peaceful and inviting in its grove by the creek, its raw wood slowly weathering to silver gray. Tali hung her woven decorations from the roof beams, small squares of red and white wool that caught the light. The eagle feathers she arranged carefully above the window, where they moved gently in the breeze. "It's beautiful," Benjamin said when she had finished. "A proper place for worship." "A place for all prayers," Tali agreed softly. "Your God and my people's traditions both speak of peace and healing. Perhaps they are not so different." The garden sprouted quickly in the warm spring soil. Tender green shoots pushed up through the dark earth, reaching for the sun. Benjamin built a simple fence around it to keep out rabbits, while Tali watered the plants each morning and evening with water from the creek. Their days fell into a gentle rhythm. Mornings began with quiet prayer in the new cabin, sometimes together, sometimes apart. Then came the daily tasks, tending the garden, checking Benjamin's trap lines, gathering wild foods that Tali knew how to find. In the evenings, they would read together from Benjamin's Bible, or share stories from their different traditions. Benjamin found himself smiling more often, noticing small joys he had forgotten how to see. The way sunlight dappled through new leaves, the first wildflowers blooming in hidden corners, the sound of Tali's soft singing as she worked. One particularly fine Sunday morning, they decided to hold their own worship service in the prayer cabin. The air was sweet with pine resin and wild roses, and sunlight streamed through the eastern window, making the feathers dance. Benjamin read from the Psalms, his deep voice filling the small space. He healeth the broken in heart, and bindeth up their wounds. The words felt truer than they had in years. When he finished reading, Tali began to sing the lullaby, the same one that had first sparked recognition in Benjamin's heart when she was feverish. But now her voice was clear and strong, the melody rising pure and true in the morning air. Benjamin closed his eyes, letting the familiar tune wash over him. He could almost feel Sarah's presence, not as a sharp pain but as a gentle blessing. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself smiling, really smiling, for the first time in years. That afternoon, a rider appeared on the trail, one of the sheriff's deputies. Benjamin met him at a distance, cautious but hopeful. "Sheriff Kellen sent me," the deputy said, handing over a sealed note. "Said to tell you he's filed the petition with the territorial court. Judge Warner's agreed to hear the case about the treaty rights." Benjamin nodded his thanks and watched the deputy ride away before, returning to share the news with Tali. They read the sheriff's note together, hope blooming in their hearts like the spring flowers dotting the mountainside. "It may take time," Benjamin said, "but at least now there's a chance for justice." Tali touched the wooden walls of their cabin. "We have time," she said simply, "and we have this place." That evening, as the sun set behind the western peaks, they sat together on the prayer cabin's small porch. The garden rows were visible in the fading light, green shoots reaching skyward. A pair of bluebirds flitted between the pines, and somewhere in the distance, a mourning dove called softly. Benjamin felt a deep peace settle over him. The mountain had always been his refuge, but now it felt truly like home. God had led him here, he realized, not just to escape his grief but to find healing, both for himself and for this remarkable young woman who had become his friend and teacher. In their shared silence, prayers rose unspoken, but felt, gratitude for safety, for growing things, for friendship found in unexpected places. The mountain air grew cool as darkness gathered, but neither of them moved to go inside just yet. This moment felt too precious to rush, too complete to need words. In the growing dusk, Tali began humming the lullaby again, its gentle notes mixing with the sound of the creek and the evening wind in the pines. Benjamin found himself humming along, remembering how Sarah had loved this song, how she had believed in its power to bring peace to troubled hearts. Here in this place they had built together, surrounded by the beauty of God's creation and the simple works of their hands, both Benjamin and Tali felt their souls expanding, healing, being restored. The prayer cabin stood as a testament to their shared journey, not just a shelter from storms, but a beacon of hope and renewal. As the first stars appeared above the mountain peaks, Benjamin realized that his heart felt lighter than it had in years. God had not abandoned him in his grief, as he had once believed. Instead, the Creator had led him through the wilderness to this unexpected redemption, this chance to help another soul, and, in doing so, to save himself. The mountain darkness wrapped around them like a gentle blanket, full of promise and possibility. Tomorrow would bring new tasks, new challenges, new opportunities for growth. But for now, in this peaceful moment, it was enough to simply be present, to feel the touch of divine grace in the cool evening air, and to know that they were exactly where they were meant to be. The peace shattered like glass at midnight. Benjamin woke to crackling flames and thick smoke filling the cabin. Orange light danced through the windows as fire consumed the outer walls. "Tali!" he shouted, lunging from his bed. He found her already awake, coughing in the thickening smoke. "Out here, boys," a voice called from outside. "Smoke 'em out." Benjamin recognized the rough drawl. Rusk's men had found them. The heat grew intense as flames climbed the cabin walls. Grabbing Tali's arm, he pulled her towards the back window. "We have to go, now!" A shot cracked through the night. The bullet splintered the window frame, grazing Benjamin's shoulder. Hot pain blazed down his arm, but he kept moving. He kicked out the window's remaining glass and helped Tali through first. They scrambled into the dark pines as more shots rang out. Behind them, their home became a tower of fire against the star-filled sky. The prayer cabin, the garden, all their careful work, everything burned. Tali stumbled to a stop on a ridge, watching flames devour their sanctuary. "The treaty copy," she whispered, tears streaming. "It was in my shawl by the bed." Benjamin pressed his bleeding shoulder. "We'll find another way, I swear it." He urged her onward through the darkness, down steep trails they could barely see. They walked until dawn painted the sky pink. Sister Maybell's small mission house appeared through the morning mist by the valley river. The old woman took one look at Benjamin's bloody shirt and Tali's soot-stained face and hurried them inside. "Lord have mercy," she muttered, cleaning Benjamin's wound. "Those devils will answer for this." She led them to her root cellar, moving aside barrels to reveal a hidden space behind. That evening, while Benjamin and Tali huddled in the cellar's darkness, they heard boots on the floorboards above. Maybell entertained visitors, her voice carrying through the wooden slats. "Heard they burned out that mountain hermit," a man said. "Good riddance. That Indian girl of his is wanted now. Fraud charges about some made-up treaty. Rusk's got the law in his pocket." "Well, I'll testify myself," Maybell declared firmly. "I knew that girl's father. The treaty was real as scripture." When the visitors left, Maybell brought down bread and coffee. Her eyes were fierce with righteousness. "We'll set this right," she promised. "God's justice may be slow, but it never fails." A week passed like molasses in winter. The morning sun found Tali at the river's edge, her bucket dipping into the clear water. She hummed softly, the same lullaby that had first touched Benjamin's heart. The deputies came silent as shadows. One grabbed her arms while the other pressed a gun to her back. "No fuss now," he muttered. Her water bucket clattered against the rocks as they dragged her away. Benjamin heard her cry from Maybell's garden, where he'd been tending herbs, his shoulder still tender beneath fresh bandages. Pain shot through him as he mounted his mule, but he spurred it toward town anyway. The beast's hooves kicked up dust as they followed the main road at a distance. Reverend Harp's white-painted church blazed in the afternoon sun. A crowd had already gathered, drawn by word of the Indian trial. Benjamin slipped in through the back, his heart pounding as he watched them march Tali to the front pew. "This woman," Rusk proclaimed, from beside the pulpit, tried to cheat honest railroad men with a forged treaty. He held up a drawing of markings he claimed were fake. The townspeople muttered and shook their heads. "Liar!" The church door banged open. Sister Maybell strode down the aisle, clutching her leather mission record book. "I knew this girl's father. His mark was true as any man's writing." She opened the book, showing identical signatures from years past. The crowd shifted uneasily. Some began shouting that treaties meant nothing, while others demanded to see Maybell's proof. The sheriff, looking troubled, ordered Tali taken to the jail until things settled. As darkness fell, rain began to patter against the tin roof of the jailhouse. Benjamin crept through shadows to her window, his boots squelching in the mud. "I won't let them hang you," he whispered through the bars. Tali's face appeared, calm in the darkness. "Let God choose the rope's use," she said softly. The words sent a chill through him. They were the same kind of quiet strength she'd shown that first night in the snow. Thunder rolled across the valley as Benjamin melted back into the rain-soaked night. The storm felt like an echo of the one that had first brought them together, heavy with the weight of things yet to come. Sunday dawned with clouds hanging low over Three Cedars like a mourner's veil. The church bell tolled, drawing townspeople through the morning mist. They filed into the white-painted building, dressed in their finest, whispering about the trial to follow. Reverend Harp stood tall in his black coat, fire in his eyes as he gripped the worn pulpit. "Brothers and sisters," his voice thundered across the pews, "we gather to cast out sin from our midst. These unholy unions between God-fearing folk and savage—" The double doors crashed open. Benjamin Brand stood in the doorway, his shirt dark with fresh blood where his wound had torn open. In his trembling hands, he clutched his charred Bible, its edges black from the cabin fire. Women gasped. Children pressed close to their mothers. "I'll speak now," Benjamin said, his voice rough but carrying to every corner. He limped down the center aisle, leaving muddy boot prints on the clean floor. "You all knew me when Sarah died. Called me cursed by God. But he wasn't finished with me." He turned to face the congregation, swaying slightly. "I found that girl half dead in the snow, tied to a tree by men who call themselves Christian. And there in my cabin, weak with fever, she sang." His voice broke. She sang the same lullaby my Sarah used to sing. The side door opened. 2 deputies led Tali in, her hands bound but her head high. Without prompting, she began to sing, her clear voice lifting in the melody that had bridged 2 worlds. A sob broke the silence. Martha Harp, the Reverend's wife, pressed her hands to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "That song," she whispered. "My grandmother learned it from her Indian friend decades ago. She sang it to me every night." The congregation sat stunned as the lullaby filled the church. Ancient words of comfort floated up to the rafters, speaking of stars and safety, of mothers watching over children regardless of the color of their skin. Reverend Harp's face had gone ashen. His wife's tears seemed to wash away something hard in his eyes as the song ended, leaving only the sound of quiet weeping in its wake. The song's final notes faded into sacred silence. Sheriff Kellen stepped forward, keys jangling in his weathered hands. "This ends now," he declared, voice thick with emotion. He unlocked Tali's shackles himself, the iron falling away with a clatter that echoed through the church. Reverend Harp stumbled from behind the pulpit, his proud shoulders crumpling as he fell to his knees. "Lord have mercy," he whispered, hands trembling. "What have we become?" His wife knelt beside him, her tears falling onto his black coat. The moment shattered as Clem Rusk shot to his feet, face purple with rage. "This is madness," he shouted. "You're all being fooled by a savage's song." He stormed down the aisle, boots thundering on wooden boards, and slammed the church door behind him. Benjamin stood straighter, reaching into his coat with his good arm. He withdrew a folded paper, holding it up for all to see. "This here's the deed to my mountain land," he announced. 300 acres of God's country." He turned to face Tali, his frost-scarred face gentle. "Let it be school land, hers and the children's, a place where all can learn together." Sister Maybelle rose from her pew, her gray head held high. "I'll oversee it," she declared. "We'll build something beautiful there, something that honors both our ways." The congregation stirred, shame and hope mingling on their faces. One by one, they began coming forward. Mrs. Peterson laid a bolt of calico cloth at Tali's feet. "For curtains," she murmured. The Cooper boys brought forward their father's woodworking tools. "To help rebuild," they offered. As the afternoon sun broke through the clouds outside, Benjamin and Tali walked free down the church steps together. Steam rose from the rain-soaked earth, curling upward like prayers. The sweet scent of wet sage drifted on the breeze, and the land itself seemed to breathe easier, as if forgiveness had washed it clean. Spring painted the mesa in vibrant greens and wildflower patches. On the land Benjamin had given, hope took physical form as walls rose from red earth. Townsfolk and Navajo families worked side by side, mixing adobe and raising timber beams for the new mission school. Benjamin's strength returned as he taught young men to track game and shape wood with patient hands. His weathered face softened when children gathered to learn. Tali moved between groups with quiet grace, teaching letters in both English and Navajo, while songs in 2 languages drifted on the breeze. Sister Maybelle held services beneath the open sky, her prayers mixing. With meadowlark songs, even those who once sneered now bent their backs to the work, helping raise the chapel bell into place. One morning, official letters arrived from Sheriff Kellen's office, formally recognizing the treaty rights Tali had fought to protect. Benjamin watched her read them, tears of joy in her eyes, and felt his own heart healing in the spring sunshine. A year had passed, and the barren hill near 3 Cedars now flourished with tall grass swaying in the breeze. The old cottonwood, where Tali had once faced death, still stood, but beside it grew a young sapling, its branches adorned with white ribbons that fluttered like dove wings. Each strip of cloth carried prayers written in different hands, some in English, others in flowing Navajo script. At the base of both trees, a carved stone marker read, "Mercy makes us kin." Benjamin stood nearby, his frost-scarred face softened by contentment as he watched children playing in the meadow. Tali's clear voice rose above their laughter, leading a hymn that blended English and Navajo words into one melody of praise. Benjamin bowed his head, whispering words of gratitude for the new life that had been granted to him. As the setting sun painted the mesas in shades of gold and purple, movement caught his eye. 2 red-tailed hawks circled overhead, their wings nearly touching as they rode the evening thermals. His heart swelled with quiet joy, seeing in their dance a sign that his beloved wife's spirit and Tali's hard-won peace were joined in heaven's careful watch. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.